All right, so I don't have any fancy intro this time. Yesterday I got back from the Shaw Classic, Strongest Man on Earth, and I've been thinking a lot about how things went down there, but I sort of had a revelation, something I've already known about myself for a really long time that's played a huge role in my success. But I did a lot of deep thinking about it yesterday. So I have a personality trait that has played a huge role in my overall success in life. And that trait is that while I go through life seeing the glass is half full, that is, I see the opportunity everywhere. I see the good in people. I see the upside, the positives, the the lessons learned, the benefit of all bad things that we experience in our life. At like a 10,000 foot view and a 5,000 foot view, I'm very much a glass half full person. There's a part of my personality at a 100 foot view or a 1,000 foot view where I hyper focus on what's wrong. And I'm going to use the Shaw Classic as an example of how that trait drives me to be successful. And it is a trait I don't see in every other person. In fact, it causes conflict between me and other people throughout my entire career, where my standard is much higher than another person's standard. That standard isn't a conscious one. It's not one where I'm saying the standard on this thing is X. It is more, the standard is essentially it's an extension of, it is the level at which I no longer feel sick to my stomach thinking about something, right? So my standard in UX and UI is an extension of, say, I'm developing a visualization. I lost my voice cheering, so sorry. I am satisfied with UX and UI when I'm done developing when three standards are met. The customer standard, our document standard, so that is, what did we say the standards for success would be in this development. And then third is when I feel like in my gut it's good enough, like I succeeded. All right, to Shaw Classic. This is our third year sponsoring the Shaw Classic. In the first year, our whole goal of going to the Shaw Classic was to support Brian Shaw. It was the first year, we're strength athletes. I have successful companies. That means I have money I can spend on sponsorships and stuff. I think Brian Shaw is an example of the kind of guy I want to be associated with, the kind of guy who I think is a positive leader on young people and has a positive impact on the world, the kind of person you want to invest in to amplify his impact. So when we first reached out to Brian Shaw in January of, probably it looks like 2021, all I knew is that we wanted to help him. I didn't know how we would help him. At the same time, so I was just going to sponsor. I was just going to, I didn't have anything. I didn't have a product. I wasn't in the fitness industry. At the time, I was developing a product for myself and for my team using a Jetson Nano, and I was just trying to prove that something I developed for Toyota to predict repetitive use injuries is something I could use in, something I took an example from Toyota and developed a tool that could predict a repetitive use injury. Like, here's a problem Toyota had. I could take that and I could translate it into a tool that could be used in the fitness industry. So starting with the Jetson Nano, and I literally started learning machine learning, pose estimation, reinforcement learning. Yeah, I knew what ML was in manufacturing, but I didn't know it in any of these types of applications. So I took an NVIDIA Jetson Nano and I basically built a vision system whose sole purpose was to be able to identify A, someone was doing a deadlift, B, the deadlift is starting. Then we would draw the pose. We would measure the distance between hands and feet. We would draw center of gravity so that we could see any distributions of weight across the body. We would measure velocity of the lift. We would calculate force if we knew the weight. We would calculate force. We would turn the lift into a shape. That is a shape that we could monitor. We could basically compare. If each rep became a shape, we could compare the shapes. So if somebody pulled, say, 3 reps at the exact same weight, we should be able to see, if it's heavy enough weight, we should be able to see fatigue, and we should also be able to see biomechanical repetition, right? So from there, we collected a bunch of data, we trained a model, and then we were able to predict 1 rep max by basically training a model on past lifts and correlating that past lift with an actual 1 rep max in competition. And then what we did was we did some additional training to try and predict what the actual 1 rep max was. Okay, so that was year 1. Year 1 was just, I had a prototype. Hey, Brian, like literally 2 months before the show, we're already a sponsor. I'm like, hey, would it be possible if we put the vision system on the plant floor and we collect data off these athletes where there was no UI, there was no user interface. It was literally results published as a JSON, as a string in a console. So I would hit start on the lift. I was actually using a Jupyter notebook. I would hit start on the lift. I'd be monitoring the camera. I'd hit start. We'd start collecting the data. We'd package a huge JSON. And then we would print the JSON and then the result at the end. And the result actually gave me a range of 1 rep maxes. We were essentially turning each lift, let's say a lift, we're filming the lift at 30 frames a second. And the lift takes exactly 2 seconds to complete. Well, the first thing, what we would do is we would be slicing the lift at every frame. So we'd actually do an analysis. We'd turn the video into a picture, but it'd be a bunch of pictures in a row. And then we would do a prediction, a predicted 1 rep max between each of the images. So from image 0 to 1, that gives us 2 data points to compare. We could basically do regression to predict a 1 rep max at that point, right? So what we were doing was plotting 1 rep max essentially on a curve. And then we could see, okay, this is a person who, based on this repetition, they could get this amount of weight off the floor, but they couldn't lock it out. Or this is what they're capable of locking out. Here's what they're capable of passing across the knees. Here's what they could get off the floor. And what you would get is a 1 rep max prediction that looks something like this. So let's say somebody was super, super strong off the floor, but couldn't lock out. So say they do a lot of deep squats, but they don't do rack pulls. Their 1 rep max curve is going to look something like that. It starts high and goes down low. Then you're going to have most people are people who start low, that is they have trouble getting the weight off the floor, but they can actually lock out way more than they can get off the floor. Alexei Novikov would be a really good example of an athlete like that. In fact, what Alexei Novikov can lock out is a pretty crazy number relative to what he can actually get off the floor. He can lock out like 1,200 pounds, but he can only get off the floor, around 900-ish, something in that range. Like, it's a huge swing for him. So in year 1, our primary goal was, I was going to be satisfied if we just proved it worked. And in year 1, what we did was we actually predicted Alexei Novikov's world record. That we went way above and beyond what my expectations were going into the show. However, there were problems. Like, for example, the board would overheat. We had never collected data on athletes for an hour straight in competition. Literally, the first time we ever did it was on the floor at the time. We'd never done it in a competition. There's no way to simulate competition conditions, right? So I was like, I felt sick to my stomach that the board shut down 15 minutes in, and we had to, figure out a way to cool it and get it restarted and all that jazz. Also, there was an issue the night before where a certificate on our Jupyter notebook had expired at midnight, and I couldn't access the system. I was sick to my stomach. So there were in year one, there was probably 4 or 5 things that happened during this show that I didn't like. So at the 10,000 foot view, I was ecstatic. I loved what we did. But at the 1,000 foot view, I lost sleep. I literally had those 4 or 5 things that must be fixed. We want to take this. But in general, I was satisfied, right? So fast forward to year 2, we expand our sponsorship. Each year we've given the Shaw Classic more and more money in sponsorship, and it's because the big chunk of that money goes to, Brian's expenses are, and he doesn't share the expenses with us, but we do get to see what the athletes get in prize money. And he's got operating costs, right? There's an operating cost for him to just break even. This year he added in, the production team that does, the CrossFit Games and stuff. They're way more expensive than ADL Live was. So you got to cover your operating expenses, and then you got to pay the athletes, and then whatever's left over you're putting into next year's show, right? It's the same thing we're doing with the Prove It conference. We have to have a simpler model to stay in business. So each year we've incremented our sponsorship. So in year 2, we were like, okay, this works. Now what we want to do is we want to show it to people. So Brian was putting on an expo for the first time. So this was last year. So we built a user interface for the system. We spent a whole year doing additional development. I've spent a fortune on this technology, definitely approaching $1 million now. And with no real plan on how to use it. It's half fun and just doing something in the industry in year 2, we built a UI. We went to the expo, and our goal was to just collect the names. We wanted to have several hundred people fans lift at the expo. We wanted to collect the names of people who would be willing to be beta testers, and I think we said we wanted 100 people to lift, and we wanted 50 people to sign up as beta testers. Well, we far exceeded that. At the expo, we ended up with 300 and something people lifting, and I think we signed up almost 200 beta testers. And the feedback we got from the fans was incredible. And in fact, we did a lot of predictions. So we had the fans come in, we would let them warm up, and we had built a platform and everything. And then the fans would pick a weight that was greater than 50% of their 1 rep max. That's one of the limits of the system. They would pull, the closer you are to your 1 rep max, the more accurate the model gets, by the way, at predicting your actual 1 rep max for that rep style. We'd have them pull 3 times at a weight greater than 50, so do 3 reps in 1 set. Then we'd analyze all 3 reps. We'd look at what the 3 predictions were. We'd show them, we'd play a replay and show them make comments on their form. And we would tell them, hey, here's what the predicted 1 rep max is for you for that 1 rep. And I would say in general, we were either right on the money, within 20 pounds of what they think they can lift, or we were 50 pounds over. And over the course of the next 6 months, the number one thing we got on Instagram was people tagging us, lifting the weight we told them they could actually pull, and saying, holy shit, these guys were right. So that further validated us. So at a 10,000 foot view, the expo totally was a huge hit. And so I was delighted. But there were things that happened that I was dissatisfied with. We didn't bring chalk. We didn't have stops for the weight, so the weight kept rolling off the board several times. Our waiver form was originally they'd have to go to a website, and there was a lot of things we learned, stuff I lost sleep over and really obsessed over, and talked to Josh about and said, hey, this is stuff we've got to we got to fix, right? So my GPS is wrong. So at the show itself, the show went great. We predicted that Tom Stoltman would win the Hummer Tire deadlift. It went great, but there were a couple of issues with this year with the UI. The UI would auto draw the graphs, and so basically the way we predict a 1 rep max, what I have to do as the analyst is I have to look at the curves and I have to intersect the 1 rep max chart with the lift curve that shows me where in the lift was the athlete at this time, and I have to do a correlation between, okay, this is what this is the 1 rep max prediction off the floor, this is at the knees, this is the transfer of the weight, and this is the lockout. And then I have to pick the lowest number. I've got to be the one to go, and I have to do an intersection. We actually have these crosshairs, and I move the mouse and I intersect it, and I go, oh, it says whatever, 1,000, or 1,084.6 pounds at that, and then we go, that's the 1 rep max for that based on that rep. All right, so, but there were some issues with the way the graphs drew. Again, we had overheating issues. We've got like the blue screen of death on a couple of different athletes. It was just, it's technical, it's software, it's the business of software. So I obsessed over that stuff. So at a 10,000 foot view, I was very satisfied with the show. We predicted the winner. There was no, world record, and we didn't predict that anyone could break a world record. There were people who were close, and then over the course of that year, we went to 2 other shows. We went to the American Deadlift Championships, and we went to the Southern Illinois Strength Expo. The 2 different things we did there was at the American Deadlift Championships, we predicted that both Don Treglia was right at the world record, that he was really close at to the world record lift of 10, I think it was 10:24. We had him like a pound under. And Don was our sponsored athlete. And then you had Dimitar Sabatinov, and we predicted that he was 2 pounds over Don, and he actually broke the world record. But one of the things that we learned, my lessons learned there, or the American record, was that our model doesn't account for hitching, because we're power lifters. We use the vision system under USAPL powerlifting rules, which does not allow hitching in the deadlift, okay? The second show we went to was the Southern Illinois Strength Expo. So that was the thing I dwelled on, was the hitching thing. So then it was, at the Southern Illinois Strength Expo, we actually used the vision system for both deadlift and squat. And we were able to accurately predict what these athletes, the athletes we interviewed some athletes. We interviewed 3 guys, and we told them what we had, and we asked them if they would be interested in us giving them their weights after they lift. So after round 1, would you like to know what the vision system predicts you can deadlift after round 1? And what would you like round 2, round 3? Okay, so of those 3, they all said yes. Of those 3 guys, 2 of them followed our recommendation, and 2 of them pulled PRs that were grinders. They were literally their max PR. And the 3rd guy consciously didn't listen to us. And I think he went 10 pounds over what we predicted, and he failed. We did an interview afterwards, and all 3 of them were like, listen, you guys were right. And the guy was like, I should have listened to you. I was just, he goes, it was just arrogance or whatever. But the big takeaway from the Southern Illinois Strength Expo for me was, again, performance of the user interface. It was just the thing I fucking stressed over, lost sleep, literally just sick to my stomach. So while overall it was a good, so I drove those improvements in all those situations. I would come home and I literally would just be sick to my stomach. And this is the way I am. It's what drives me to succeed. I know that it's played a huge role in my success in life, right? So fast forward to this Shaw Classic. This Shaw Classic was across the board was a huge success for the vision system. We actually had a pro athlete use one of our values to determine what he was going to lift in the 3rd pull. He pulled 961. We actually made a mistake in the input, so I'm going to kind of explain that. And he pulled 8 pounds under what we predicted he could actually pull. We actually predicted he could pull between he could get 1,000, he could lock out 1,000, he could get 969 off the floor. Yeah, I think that's how it was. And he pulled 961 and cleared it for the whole. It was a complete repetition. And he told me backstage, he's like, listen, I just took what you guys did and I said, as long as I'm under 1,000, I'm good. That's what he said. And he picked 961. And then he reached out to us afterwards and said, I'd love for you guys to come bring the vision system. He's based in San Antonio. He's a Texas guy. He's like, I'd love for you to bring it down and let's train with it. He's friends with Don Treglia, who's one of our athletes. We also have another athlete, Ethan Erickson, who competed in the Open. So across the board, the feedback from the fans at the expo was so many people came back and were like, this was so, like, what are you guys doing with this technology? It was so helpful to me. And a lot of people brought back how we rated them last year. They literally they would record the screen or they took a screenshot and they would come back and compare this year with what they did last year. I mean, one guy went up 100 pounds and he didn't tell us. And then we predicted 100 pounds and showed him, and he's like, fuck, man, I think he went to 570. I think he went from a 480 something to a 570 max. Across the board, it was a huge success. But we did a thing this year that I look back on it and I'm like, man, we did it a year too early. That's, I'm just kicking myself in the ass. So it was a huge success. But we did a thing this year that we had never done before, and that was our vision system was being used on the replay. Now, in the second round, not in the first round. The first round was like we actually were using one of the producers' cameras. They had a full professional setup truck out there, this huge, it was crazy, to get to see how that happens behind the scenes. Our laptop was plugged into their video feed. Justin, who's a data scientist, he's basically handling the keyboard. I'm doing the analysis. And then we had a pop-up that would pop up. He would type in the two numbers I gave him because we had to create a custom overlay that said strongest man on earth. It had to fit with everything else that was in the production. It's not something that was in our system. So we had to add this additional element where we had to type in velocity and 1 rep max. So I would have to do the analysis, give him the number, and he would type them in. However, there were numbers that we thought what we'd be able to do is use a model that would pull the numbers out for us. So there would be a velocity in the field. There would be a 1 rep max in the field. Sometimes those numbers were right. It picked the right number. Sometimes it didn't. We don't know why, and we didn't even find out that was a problem until we were plugged into the production truck. There's a whole host of technical things that goes into this. What is the frame rate of the camera? That is our feed. The frame rate of the feed is important because we're literally slicing the data on the frame. So if we're slicing at 30 frames a second, but the feed is at 60 frames a second, that's not that big of an issue. What we're doing is we're seeing what's going to happen is we're going to literally the velocity will be 1/2 the number, and what predicted 1 rep max will be 1/2. It's literally a 1 to 2 ratio, right? We're basically scaling down all the outputs. So it needs to be a 1-to-1. Whatever frames is coming in are the frames we have to slice by. So that was a problem. We discovered there was, the feed would downscale, and so that was an issue. We ran into some problems there where we ended up with, of the 32 lifts that we analyzed with our system, we got 26 of the 32 correct. There were 6 lifts that we got the wrong predictions. Either we hit okay on the prediction that, we didn't type in the actual one. And so what went out to the feed was, and they ended up using one of those replays. When I was doing my interview between round 1 and round 2, they used Mitch Hooper's 1070 prediction that wasn't accurate. His prediction was 996 lockout, and the 1070 number was an anomaly. It was like his head moving or something at the top of the lift. So that 1070 wasn't even right, and they used it and that's our fault. It's not, So there were little things like, and by the way, the average fan probably doesn't even notice. But me, I noticed. And it's like I've dwelled on it for the last 48 hours. Lost sleep the first night, lost sleep last night, just thinking about how to fix that. Overall, I'm very happy with how it went down. But what I think is important to note is part of what drives my success is this thing in my gut where I'm dissatisfied and I really, really dwell on the thing that needs to be fixed. And that gets me closer and closer. It gets me, I think, closer and closer to perfection. I'm not close to perfection, but it gets me closer to perfection than I think the average person. And so that is a trait of mine. That's a trait of mine that makes me successful. And I don't know if it can be developed. I do know that you could create mechanisms to artificially create that. Mine is like an actual emotional response inside my stomach, But I've really thought about this the last 2 days. I put together, and I saw it. I saw it with Brian Shaw. They screwed up on the second event. The floor guys put the wrong weights out, and you had 4 athletes go using the wrong weights. And, here's another thing I did. I misspoke in my interview. I didn't take notes out with me. So I said we predicted Thor at 1,100 pounds max. He could get 1,100 off the floor, 1050 at lockout. He could get 1,100 off the floor, 1050 at lockout. I didn't say that. I said 1,100. I didn't qualify both numbers. And then when I talked about Matt Ragg, I said Matt Ragg was dead even at 1,100. I misspoke. I meant he was dead even at 1,000. But because I had said the word 1,100 with Thor, my brain just said 1,100 because I didn't take notes. So I beat myself up going, you only get one chance to say those numbers. I didn't read them off a piece of paper. I had them it was in my head, and and I said a number that was wrong. And in my other professional life, I have an opportunity to correct something when I misspeak. But when you're on TV, on a live stream, you don't have that opportunity. So overall, this Shaw Classic was a huge success, and I should be satisfied. And I think a lot of people would be, but I'm not. I'm not satisfied at all. In fact, it's like I want to get the whole team into the office when they get back tomorrow. I wrote a whole list of lessons learned. I literally, while I'm sitting up on day one in the stands, I'm literally writing the lessons learned and sending them to the team. I didn't take a break. I did it all while my brain was fresh. And I think it's an important lesson for people to, an exercise for you to go through. My kids, my grandkids, anybody else who's watching this shit, that, what drives you to get better? Not in a thing, but in all things. Because this feature, if I care about something, if it's not a thing where I'm like, that doesn't matter. If it matters to me, then this emotional reaction holds true. I see the glass is half full at the 10,000 and 5,000 foot level, but at the 1,000 and 100 foot view level, I'm hypercritical of the things that didn't go the way I wanted them to go. And, I saw this last night in the Rangers game. Josh Young, the Rangers won in a walk-off yesterday, okay? Josh Young, it was in the bottom of the 10th. Adolis Garcia is on second base. Josh Young is up to bat. Young hits a Baltimore chop down to third base. He's running it out. The third baseman throws the ball a little bit wide right. So Santana, who's the first baseman for Minnesota, comes off the bag, catches the bag, and tries to swipe Josh because he's not on the bag anymore. He hits Josh in the head, tags him, but the ball comes out, rolls away, and Adolis Garcia scores from second, and the Rangers win in a walk-off. And they interview Josh Young right after the game, and he was embarrassed. He was happy the team won. But at the 10,000 foot view, the glass was half full. But at the 100 foot view, he wasn't happy that it was a Baltimore chop, because in that the fielding percentage of that third baseman is probably fucking 98, 99%, which means there's a 1 or 2% chance that he's going to make a mistake, which is ultimately going to score the run. And so that means in Josh's mind, he probably looked like I didn't do my job there because I had to fall back on that 1 or 2% chance that that guy would screw up. It wasn't me taking advantage of the 98% of the time that he wouldn't screw up. It was me, So he's happy with the win, but he's probably going back and looking at that bat and going, what could I do differently? Should I have even swung at that pitch? That's what I'm doing here. It's a trait I have. And you should ask yourself if you have it. And if you do have it, in what form? And I'll bet if you do that thought experiment, you will see what drives your success. If you don't have that, let's say you don't have that trait, you're okay with good enough, then you're probably doing stuff you don't really care about. It's probably only in the stuff that you don't care about. But let's say it's even with the things you care about that you don't drill down. You should probably explore that. What is it that makes you not look at the 100-foot or 1,000-foot level and drill down? And why is it you don't lose sleep over the things that you could do better, right? With the things that are important to you. All right, with that, like, subscribe, comment down below, and I'll see you in the next one.